Mark was a 21-year-old college student working the late shift at a small grocery store near his apartment. It was a cold Thursday night in November, and the parking lot outside was empty, except for his old blue car parked under a flickering light. The air felt heavy, and every breath Mark took was cold, making his nose sting as he carried boxes back and forth to the shelves. The store was small, with 5 aisles, a tiny freezer section in the back, and a small office near the stockroom. Mark was alone, just like most nights, and he was used to the silence of the store once the last customer left. It was almost 11:20 p.m., and the store closed at 11. Mark had locked the doors, turned off the open sign, and started mopping the floor to finish up quickly so he could go home. The smell of wet cardboard and cleaning liquid mixed with the cold air, and the soft music from the radio played in the background, filling the empty aisles with old songs that made the place feel less lonely. Mark's hands were cold from rinsing the mop, and he felt tired after a long day of classes and work. Hoping to get some rest once he got home. Just as he finished mopping aisle 2, the front door beeped loudly. Mark looked up, confused and startled, because he was sure he had locked the doors. The sound echoed in the quiet store, and it made Mark's heart beat faster. He put the mop down and looked toward the front entrance, expecting to see a late customer trying to buy something quickly before closing. But what he saw made him stop and stare. A tall man had walked in, wearing a black hoodie with a hood pulled over his head, hiding most of his face. His hands were deep in his pockets, and he walked slowly, almost dragging his feet as he moved past the carts near the door. Mark felt a cold chill run down his back, but he tried to keep calm, thinking maybe it was just someone desperate for something small, like milk or bread, before the night ended. "Sorry, we're closed," Mark called out, trying to sound firm but polite, hoping the man would understand and leave quietly. The man did not answer. He didn't even look at Mark. Instead, he walked slowly toward aisle 3, his shoes squeaking on the wet floor. Mark felt uneasy, watching how the man moved without caring about the closed sign or the empty store. Mark glanced at the clock on the wall, hoping the man would leave soon, but the man kept walking, ignoring everything. "Sir, we're closed now," Mark said again, a bit louder this time, trying to hide the slight shake in his voice. The man stopped in the middle of the bread aisle, standing still for a moment. He didn't move, and the silence in the store became heavier. Mark could hear the soft hum of the refrigerators and his own breathing, and he felt his hands getting sweaty even though it was cold inside. The man slowly turned his head toward Mark, but the hood covered most of his face, and Mark couldn't see his eyes. The way the man tilted his head was strange, like he was studying Mark, but there was no sound, no words, no sign of what he wanted. Mark felt a growing sense of fear in his chest, but he tried to stay calm, thinking maybe the man was homeless and needed help. The man turned his head back and started walking again, but he didn't go toward the exit. Instead, he walked down the aisle, moving toward the back of the store near the freezers and the storage door. Mark's eyes followed him, confused about why he was going deeper into the store instead of leaving. Then Mark noticed something that made him feel even more uneasy. The man was not looking at the shelves or the products like a customer would. Instead, as he walked under each security camera in the aisle, he would stop and look up at it, standing there for a second before moving to the next one. Mark watched as the man checked each camera slowly, as if he was mapping where they were or testing if they worked. The lights above aisle 4 started flickering as the man walked past, and Mark felt the cold air getting colder. He realized that he had never felt this kind of fear in the store before, even though he worked alone every night. His instincts told him that something was wrong, and he reached into his pocket to grab his phone, pretending to check it while getting ready to call his boss or even the police if things got worse. The man's behavior was strange, and the way he ignored Mark's words made Mark feel trapped, like he was in the store with someone who didn't care about rules or boundaries. Mark tried to think of what to do, whether he should follow the man, call someone, or leave the store to get help. But a part of him felt frozen, unable to move, as he watched the man disappear into the back aisle near the storage door, leaving Mark with a sense of real-world fear he had never felt before. The empty store, the flickering lights, the cold air, and the strange man's quiet movements made Mark feel like he was living in a nightmare, one that was happening in the most normal place in his life, the grocery store where he worked. And deep down, Mark knew that this was not just a regular customer walking in late. This was the beginning of something he would never forget. Mark stood near the front counter, gripping his phone tightly while watching the man disappear toward the back of the store. The store felt colder now, and the lights above aisle 4 flickered again, making a soft buzzing noise that seemed louder in the quiet. Mark's mind was racing with questions. Who was this man? Why was he ignoring him? Why was he looking at the cameras like that? Deep down, Mark felt that this man was not just a customer who walked in late. There was something different, something off about the way he moved and acted. Mark swallowed hard, trying to clear his dry throat, and called out again, louder this time. "Sir, we are closed. You need to leave now." His voice echoed through the empty aisles, bouncing off the cold metal shelves, but there was no reply. The man kept moving slowly, almost dragging his feet as he turned into the aisle with canned goods. Mark could hear the soft thud of the man's shoes hitting the wet floor, and he noticed that every step the man took left a dark, wet footprint behind, like he had stepped in water mixed with mud. But there was no rain outside, and the ground in the parking lot was dry when Mark came in for his shift. Mark felt a chill run down his back as he watched the footprints form a trail down the aisle. The smell in the store changed too, mixing the usual cold air and stale bread scent with something that smelled like rust or old pennies. Mark's heart was beating fast, but he kept his eyes on the man, trying to see if he would turn around and leave. The man finally stopped near the middle of the aisle, standing in front of the shelf with canned beans and vegetables. Mark waited, hoping he would pick something up and come to pay quickly, but the man just stood there, not moving, his hood still hiding most of his face. Then, very slowly, the man lifted his hand and picked up a single can of beans. He held it in front of him, staring at it, not turning it around to check the label or the price. Mark felt the tension in the air, heavy and uncomfortable, as if the whole store was holding its breath. Mark took a few steps forward, moving closer to the aisle, and repeated, "Sir, we're closed now. Please put that back and leave." The man didn't respond. Instead, he lifted his head slightly, and for a moment, Mark thought he saw a glimpse of his face under the hood. His skin looked pale, and his lips were dry and cracked, but Mark couldn't see his eyes clearly. The man stood still for a few more seconds. Then, without warning, he opened his hand and let the can of beans drop to the floor. The can hit the tile with a loud metallic clang, rolling away slowly across the wet floor. leaving a small line in the dirt and water as it moved. The sound echoed in the store, and Mark felt a spike of fear in his chest, his breath catching as he watched the can roll toward him. Finally stopping near his foot, Mark looked up at the man, who was now standing perfectly still, his head slightly tilted again in that strange, unnatural way. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the freezers and the buzzing light above. Then, in a dry, cracked voice that made Mark's skin crawl, the man whispered, "I used to work here." The words were soft but clear, and they froze Mark in place. The way the man said it, so calm yet empty, felt wrong, as if he was remembering something dark. Mark blinked, not sure if he heard him correctly, and asked in a shaky voice, "What?" The man didn't answer. He just turned away slowly, his shoes making that soft thud again, and started walking down the aisle toward the back of the store, heading for the stockroom door. Mark felt like the air had gotten even colder, and he shivered, taking a step back as he watched the man leave more dark footprints on the floor. The smell of rust in the air seemed stronger now, mixing with the cold to make Mark's stomach turn. Mark looked down at the can of beans near his foot, noticing that the label was torn and the metal had a small dent from hitting the floor. He felt like the can was a message, a sign that something was wrong. His mind was telling him to call the police, to get help, but another part of him felt stuck, frozen by fear and curiosity. Why did the man say he used to work here? Why was he acting like this in the middle of the night, ignoring Mark's calls to leave? The way the man moved so slowly, with his head down and his hood covering his face, made Mark feel like he was watching something out of a nightmare. Something he would only see in horror videos online. Mark glanced around the store, seeing the empty aisles, the flickering lights, and the dark windows reflecting his own scared face. He realized he was alone, truly alone, with a stranger who was acting like he belonged there, like he had a reason to be back in the store after closing. Mark took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, and decided he had to see what the man was doing in the back. If he didn't check, he would feel helpless, and if the man was dangerous, Mark needed to know. Holding his phone tightly, Mark slowly started walking down the aisle, following the trail of dark, wet footprints that led toward the back of the Fava store, toward the heavy stockroom door that now felt like the entrance to something unknown, something terrifying. Each step Mark took felt heavy, echoing in the quiet store as he prepared himself to face whatever was waiting for him in the back, hoping it would just be a confused man he could help, but fearing it was something much worse. Mark's heart was pounding as he followed the dark, wet footprints toward the back of the grocery store. Each step felt heavy, and the cold air made it hard for him to breathe normally. The store, which usually felt safe and boring during his late shifts, now felt like a different world, a place where something bad could happen at any moment. The lights above him flickered, and the soft buzz of the freezers was the only sound in the air as Mark stepped carefully down the last aisle, clutching his phone tightly in his hand. When he reached the heavy stockroom door, he noticed it was slightly open, just enough for a thin line of darkness to show through the crack. Mark hesitated, swallowing hard, his dry throat making it uncomfortable to breathe. He could see the trail of dark, muddy footprints leading right through the doorway, disappearing into the deeper darkness inside the stockroom. The cold air from the freezers mixed with a strange, rusty smell that made Mark's stomach twist. Taking a deep breath, Mark pushed the door open slowly. It creaked loudly, echoing in the silence, making Mark flinch as he stepped inside. The stockroom was filled with boxes stacked on metal shelves, crates of milk, and old carts with wheels that squeaked whenever they moved. The air inside felt even colder, and Mark could see his breath in front of him as he exhaled. The light in the stockroom was dim, coming from a single flickering bulb that made the shadows on the walls look like they were moving. "Sir, you can't be back here," Mark called out, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to sound braver than he felt. There was no answer. Instead, Mark heard a soft dripping sound like water hitting the floor over and over again. He followed the sound, moving deeper into the stockroom, carefully stepping around crates and boxes, trying to be as quiet as possible so he could hear any other sounds. The dripping led him to a small puddle on the floor near the shelves, and when Mark looked closely, he realized the liquid was dark, almost black, and it smelled metallic, like old blood. Mark felt his chest tighten with fear, and for a moment he thought about turning around and running out of the store. But he knew he couldn't just leave without knowing what was happening. He took another deep breath and moved further into the stockroom, following the trail of wet footprints until he reached the back corner of the room. That's when he saw the man. The man was standing in the dark corner, facing the wall with his head down. His shoulders were shaking slightly, and at first, Mark thought the man was crying. The man's black hoodie looked damp, and there was a large, dark stain on the back of it that seemed to spread down to the hem. The stain looked like it had dried and gotten wet again, making it appear darker under the dim light. "Do you need help?" Mark asked softly, his voice echoing in the cold air. The man didn't respond, but his shoulders shook harder, and a low, muffled sound came from him, like a sob or a whisper that Mark couldn't quite hear. Mark took a cautious step closer, trying to see the man's face, hoping he was just someone who needed help, even if he was acting strange. Slowly, the man turned around to face Mark. The movement was slow, almost unnatural, and Mark felt every hair on his arm stand up as he saw the man's face under the hood. His skin was pale, almost gray, and there were dark circles under his empty, distant eyes that stared without blinking. His lips were dry and cracked, and when he opened his mouth to speak, no sound came out at first, only a soft, dry gasp. Mark stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat as the man finally spoke in a dry, broken voice that echoed in the cold room. "I never clocked out." The words sent a chill through Mark's entire body, and his mind tried to understand what the man meant. The way he said it, so empty and hopeless, made Mark feel like the man wasn't just talking about a job. He was talking about something much deeper, something he couldn't escape from. The man took a step forward, and Mark stepped back, bumping into a box behind him. The man's hoodie shifted as he moved, revealing the large, dark stain on his shirt underneath. Mark realized it wasn't mud. It was blood. Old, dried blood that had mixed with something wet, creating the dark, rusty smell that filled the room. Mark's hand shook as he raised his phone, thinking about calling the police, but his fear made it hard for him to unlock the screen. The man took another step forward, his shoes making that soft, wet sound on the floor, leaving more dark footprints behind him. His empty eyes were locked on Mark, and his mouth moved again, but no sound came out this time. The air in the stockroom felt colder than ever, and Mark could see his breath coming out in shaky puffs as he tried to move away. The man reached out a hand toward Mark, and for a moment, Mark saw the hand was pale, with long, thin fingers and dark stains under the nails. Mark's mind was screaming at him to run, to leave the store and never come back, but his legs felt heavy, like they were stuck to the cold floor. The man took one more step, his hand reaching closer, his mouth moving again as if he was trying to say something important. In that moment, Mark felt like he was looking at someone who wasn't truly alive, someone who was stuck in the store, unable to leave, trapped in the cold air and flickering lights forever. Mark's mind was screaming at him to run as the man with the pale face and dark, empty eyes reached out his hand in the cold, dim stockroom. Mark could hear the slow, heavy beating of his heart, and his breath came out in small clouds in the cold air. He took a step back, bumping into a stack of boxes, nearly knocking them over. The man's hand hovered in the air, shaking slightly, and for a moment, Mark could see the dark stains under the man's fingernails, looking like dried blood. The man's mouth moved again, and this time Mark heard the dry, broken whisper, "Help me clock out." Those words sent a deep, sharp fear into Mark's chest. The way the man said it, so empty and tired, made Mark realize this wasn't a normal person standing in front of him. The man's empty eyes held a sadness that felt heavy, like he had been there for a long time, stuck in that cold room, unable to leave. Mark's legs finally responded to his fear, and he turned, pushing past the boxes as he ran toward the stockroom door. The door swung open with a loud creak, slamming against the wall as Mark burst out into the main store area. The lights above the aisles flickered again, buzzing louder than before, and for a moment, all the lights turned off, leaving Mark in complete darkness. He froze, unable to see anything, hearing only his own shaky breathing and the faint dripping sound from the stockroom behind him. With a loud click, the lights flickered back on, blinking rapidly before staying on, casting a cold, white light over the empty aisles. Mark ran down the aisle, past the shelves of cereal and snacks, the cold air biting at his skin. He could feel that he was being watched, like the man was still there, following him silently, even though Mark didn't hear any footsteps. When Mark reached the front counter, he grabbed his keys with shaking hands and pulled out his phone. But his fingers were so cold and shaky that he struggled to unlock it. The radio in the store, which had been playing soft music all night, was now silent, only static crackling through the speakers, making the empty store feel even more eerie. Mark turned to look back one last time before running out. That's when he saw the man again. The man was standing at the end of aisle 4, the same aisle where he had dropped the can of beans earlier. His head was tilted to the side, and his pale face was half hidden under the hood, but Mark could see his empty eyes staring at him. The man's mouth moved again, silently repeating the same words Mark had heard before. "Help me clock out." The words echoed in Mark's mind as he turned and ran toward the front door, unlocking it with shaking hands. The cold air outside felt like a slap on his face as he pushed the door open and ran to his car, the gravel crunching under his shoes. Mark fumbled with his keys, dropping them once before picking them up again and unlocking the door. He got inside, slamming the door shut, and started the engine, his breath fogging up the windshield as he put the car in reverse. As he pulled out of the parking lot, Mark glanced back at the store through the rearview mirror. The lights above the entrance flickered again, and for a moment, Mark thought he saw the man standing just inside the glass doors, watching him leave. His dark figure stood there, still and silent, as if he was waiting, hoping that Mark would come back to help. Mark drove away, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His heart was still racing, and he felt a heavy weight in his chest as he tried to process what had just happened. The cold, empty store, the flickering lights, the pale man with empty eyes, it all felt like a nightmare, but Mark knew it was real. He had seen it, smelled the rusty scent, and heard the man's broken whisper. The next day, Mark called his boss and quit his job. He didn't tell him what happened, only saying that he couldn't work there anymore. He didn't want to go back to that store, to see the dark aisles at night or hear the radio static in the empty air. He didn't want to risk seeing that man again, standing under the flickering lights, asking for help to leave a place he could never leave. A week later, Mark was scrolling through his phone, trying to distract himself from the nightmares that kept him awake at night. That's when he found an old news article that made his blood run cold. It was about the grocery store he had worked at. The article was from 5 years ago, reporting that an employee had died in the store after a closing shift. The young man had been found in the stockroom by the morning staff, and the police said it was an accident. They said the man had slipped and hit his head, dying alone in the cold, empty store. But what caught Mark's attention was the last line of the article. The employee's time card was never found, and it appeared he never clocked out that night. Mark's hands were shaking as he read that line over and over again. The man he saw that night, with the pale face and empty eyes, was not alive. He was stuck in the store, forever trying to finish his shift, forever trying to clock out and leave, but he never could. Now, whenever Mark drives past that grocery store, he sees the lights flicker near the front entrance, and sometimes, just for a moment, he thinks he sees a dark figure standing there, watching him as he passes by, waiting, silently asking for help that Mark knows he can never give. And Mark knows he will never forget the cold, empty store and the man who could never clock out.